I was in the Army Air Force in World War II. I was a member of a bomber crew, a couple different bomber crews. The first one that I was with was the B-17 bomber. And after our training here in the States, this group was sent over to England. I was based in England, and we took over one of the first airplane B-17s that had a radar system where you could bomb. You could see the ground through the clouds through the radar system. Prior to that time, there was a lot of problem with a heavy cloud cover in Europe, which prevented them from doing visual bombing. So they had to find a way to do it. And this is with the radar equipment. We were trained to do that type of work. So I was a radio operator on the bomber crew, which made I was responsible for communications between our group that we were leading and headquarters back in London. I had to do all of this by Morse code, and all the messages even had to be encoded. And there was a new code every day. Of course, you got a little book with the code in it, and there was always said that if you got shot down, well, the radio operator was supposed to eat the book before he hit the ground, so that British or the Germans would not get it. So the book didn't look very appetizing, and I never did have to eat one, so that was good. I enlisted in December of 1942 when I was 18 years old. And I stayed in service until December of 1945 when I was honorably discharged. As far as I was concerned, and the Air Force was concerned, one of the major turning points in the war was when the American or the Allied Air Forces in Europe took over superiority of the air. They were able to accompany with the P-51 fighter plane the bomb groups deep into Germany and penetrate where they couldn't go before because the German Air Force was superior. And until we could get them controlled, we were just sort of at a standstill. But once the Allied Air Force had defeated the German Air Force, basically, so they no longer dominated us. They could no longer go out and bomb, for instance, London, or no longer put together effective groups to shoot down bombers. Then that was a great turning point. That really speeded up towards the end of the war. Now there were other turning points in the war, and that happened before that. For instance, when the war first broke out in about 1939, Germany started taking over countries in Europe and in Asia, and they just proceeded as they were more or less pleased to do it. And we couldn't help at that time. They were short of military equipment, they were short of arms, and of course they were short of people. What we did in the United States is we gave them a program where we would help them by building up our military factories to produce equipment, and we'd ship it over to them by our cargo ships, and so they wouldn't be short. They wouldn't have to tie up and be behind on the equipment in order to fight an effective war. Now, of course, the Germans had a tremendous U-boat submarine fleet, and they loved to play havoc with all of our cargo ships as they tried to get across the Atlantic Ocean with all this equipment, and they did sink a very, very great number of them. They lost a lot of them, but we got enough of them across that it really made a turning point there, where the Allies over there, Britain especially, was getting equipment, getting firepower and all that, and they could manage to control the Germans. But the Germans had pushed them off the European continent into the English Sea, and they didn't have anybody over on land. But that gave them the equipment and the base for taking the war to the German army. That was a great turning point. What led up to the turning point, you mean?
Yep.
Well, the fact that we were allies with Great Britain in so many things, and we knew we had to help them, and we were in a position to do it, but we didn't have manpower to send over and help them. So by providing them with the equipment to fight a war and stop the Germans was the incentive and the agreement that we had with them, so that would help turn the war around into our favor, where we could take the war to them rather than them taking the war to us. What happened after the turning point? The entire aspect of the war changed because Germany was no longer able to be an aggressive. They began to try to hold on to what they had taken, and for instance, in Europe, the Air Force was now able to bomb all the military production plants in Germany, their airplane factories. We had superiority with our fighter airplanes to keep their fighter airplanes under control and not doing the damage. They were no longer able to make air raids on London, for example, and or other targets in England. So everything was going with the Allied people, Allied forces, United States, when they got in there. And at that point, then we were in a position where we had trained manpower, so we were in a position to send men over there also, our ground forces to get over there. And so when once land was subdued or sort of conquered, we could invade Europe, and everybody knows about the invasion of Normandy and the other places there. And I was fortunate enough to bomb the French coast the day of the invasion, June 6th, 1944, and saw all this happening. It was tremendous sight. Let's see, where do we go from there? Well, the other thing is then that we began to be very dominant in Europe, and but we were just kind of holding our own in the Pacific. We were fighting wars over both oceans, and now we could turn some of our military might to concentrating on conquering Japanese in the Pacific. I had finished my tour in Europe of bombing missions by that time, and I came back to the States, and I discovered that the people who were flying the biggest bomber that we had, the B-29, which was new, and this is the one that could fly, you could keep it up in the air for 16 to 20 hours because they could do long-range flying over the ocean, over the Pacific. And this is what we needed so that we could bomb the industrial plants in Japan and start to destroy their ability to make war. And so I did train with the B-29 crew and went to the island of Guam and was able to participate in some of that before the war ended. But we were always afraid of, and that was a turning point over in Japan, of course, in the Pacific. Again, it was a matter of air superiority. We had defeated the Japanese army. The kamikazes were no longer very effective. And you know what the kamikazes were? Those were the pilots that took a plane up and they just crashed their plane right into another airplane. It was their last flight. They knew it. They would not survive it. And so they were dedicated to doing that. And they did a lot of damage up to a point. But we were able to destroy their ability to get these planes up in the air and to shoot them down before they got to the targets they were going to go to. And this was in late 1945, or in late summer, early fall of 45, when the atomic bomb was dropped. And we had that kind of really was the biggest turning point of ending the war over there. Everybody was concerned about invading it, making a land invasion on Japan, and that would be very, very, very costly in soldiers' lives and the people's lives and Japanese lives and that. But when we dropped the atomic bomb and they saw the power of that, and they still said, no, we're not going to give in. We're not going to sign a peace treaty. We dropped a second one. And that right after that, they said, hey, let's talk peace. And that was the big turning point in that particular war. And it was a tremendous thing because we did not have to invade the land of Japan and suffer tremendous losses. And the Japanese people were spared too of doing that. So there were a number of turning points all through the war. Each one of them was just another step towards the Allies becoming successful and bringing the war to a close finally.